before we start getting into that and I get overly excited, perhaps if we go along the line and you can introduce yourselves, please.
Okay,
Andrea.
well, good to see everyone. My name is Andrea Wu. I'm the CEO of Urban Airport. We worked with Future Flight and came out of the Challenge 2 when we delivered the first fully operational vertiport in Coventry almost 2 years ago. I'm happy to be here and to talk about how do we take lessons learned and then how do we kind of bring that into a more commercial world.
Savani, I'm the Vice President for the Global Technology Centre for GK and Aerospace. It's our R&D facility based up in Bristol. GK and Aerospace is a major Tier 1 company. Pretty much on most commercial flights that you've flown on will have some bits from GKN's bag of tricks on it. And we are very interested in sustainable aviation broadly, but in particular we're supporting right across the different aviation segments, from housing the build of vertical aerospace within our centre all the way through to pioneering something that Sophie mentioned around hydrogen electric propulsion for longer range aircraft.
Great.
Thank you, and I'm Gary Cutts. I'm Challenge Director for the Future Flight Challenge, and a bit to my surprise, on the 8th of April this year, that will be my 5th birthday in this role. It feels like it's gone way more quickly than that.
You don't look a day over fold.
Actually, funny enough, on the 8th of April, that's my 5th anniversary in the Catapult, so perhaps there's something going on there.
Since we're declaring 4th of April as my 2nd anniversary at GK now.
Right, okay, fabulous.
Perhaps we should have a...
At least it wasn't the 1st of April, that's the thing. Right, thank you very much indeed. So, into the question. So, it's quite an easy question. So, if you were asked to list 3 things that the Future Flight Challenge programme has achieved so far, what its enduring legacy will be, what would they be, and why have you chosen them? Andrea.
I go first?
Oh, please.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so 3 things. So, number 1, as I still think that, so when we delivered Air 1 Coventry, we brought together what everybody likes to talk about, the ecosystem. And I think the terminology has been kind of overused almost a bit, because yes, the ecosystem, but I think it's important to move to reality, right? To really look at projects rather than just keeping in this academic world. And I think Coventry did it really well. And nobody else has really managed to kind of replicate it. And maybe it's because of the delivery team. I think it has a lot to do with the UK government funding that. I think that otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And also I think from a kind of from a city perspective, to be really excited about something, because it takes a lot to get everybody excited, and I think that's the hard thing. And I think the other things that came out of it were that we're in a position now to say, we did that, but how do we bridge to the industrial world? So how can we take all these lessons learned and make it a commercial reality? And the best way to do it is to do something practical. Maybe these were 2 points, but maybe that's okay.
No, that's fine.
Yeah?
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I was noting, and I forgot to say that there's obviously a year to go yet before the end of the programme, so we're still not there. But Samir.
If you're asking for 3 things, that's 9, right, from each of us, so that's a tricky challenge. I'd say
We
first...
can repeat the same one.
No, I mean, sort of touching on the ecosystem, for us it's been collaboration, particularly with partners that an aerospace manufacturer might never come across. And so that collaboration has been really important, and a couple of examples that we've worked on things like Project Napkin and Skybus as 2 projects has just given us insight into some of the use cases and how those translate back into aircraft design as well. So that's been really good. I think the second thing it's given is a level of realism, because when you look at things like advanced air mobility and Uber Elevate and all of those kind of initial hype creating reports, you had a huge variation as to what this market really looks like. So I think we've done the very British thing of creating some realism around that, and that's been really helpful, and it's certainly helped us as one of the organisations investing in. And I'd say the third thing is it's started to bring this domain into the public sphere. I think there's a lot more to do in that particular space, but we've seen some really interesting use cases which have real societal impact, medical drone deliveries, for example. And I think it's starting to bring it into the public sphere, and I think we can do a lot more of that.
Sure. Great. And Gary?
Yeah, I'm not going to double up too much. I'm going to try and choose a couple of different things. So number one, I will kind of repeat the whole ecosystem convening. When I came into this role, I think I sort of understood what we were trying to do, and it's become way, way bigger than that. So now what we'd regard as the ecosystem, or we'd call it the future flight community, is more than 230 organisations that we've funded directly, about 500 we interface with. And I wouldn't have imagined that would have been a number of regulators, at least 6 government departments, local authorities across the country, social science research departments, and. So the sheer volume of that, convening that and getting the thought processes, really proud of that. I think that's better than many other countries have done. Second, a slightly different angle. I often tell this story, but when we came into the Future Flight Challenge, it was very heavily backed by big established industry players. And that's perfectly good. I have no downer on those people at all. GKN's a really good example. But alongside that, complementing that, the amount of new entrants there have been, so people who barely existed, or in some cases I think did not exist when we launched the challenge, they were an idea. So I think we have companies, I think yours is probably one of them, that was probably an idea at the start of the Future Flight Challenge, now has an international order book. I mean, that's amazing. So that, bringing new people on of a different size, and particularly people who didn't necessarily have an aviation background, so that kind of new ideas coming in. And I will say, to come back to the big organisations, that partnership of that new thinking with some established players is really, really important. And then a final thing is, this is kind of a little sales pitch for the UK, because there is a British characteristic here. We can be a bit see the worst of things, and we think other countries do everything better, and people are quite right to be frustrated and want to go faster. But it's interesting that we had a call earlier in the week with a certain G20 country that's desperate for us to go visit and work with them, who've explicitly copied things we've done in their equivalent to the Future Flight Programme, and they'll openly admit that. They absolutely explicitly copied that. Last week we had feedback from DFT, who'd been in another G20 country, who are desperate for us to go so they can start to copy what we've done. So that, much as there are lots of things that we could do more and better as a country, and we'd like to do that, we shouldn't underestimate that we're actually sort of in the mix of the top countries across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because from our own perspective in the Catapult, we've also been involved in a country overseas that have asked us to define a very similar programme, which covers both aviation but also aerospace as well, so to help them develop their programme as well. So they've seen this as a world-leading programme, and it certainly is for what's been achieved so far, and obviously what we're looking forward to for the rest of the day, the rest of the year rather. But I'd pick up on a piece, something you said, Andrea, which so we're really good at doing this stuff. But then we get to the point where we have to transition from innovation to commercial operations. So this becomes a bit of a challenge in the UK. It seems to sort of stop or fade out, or it goes overseas. So obviously the relationship we've had with government, with Future Flight Challenge, with the industry and the regulators as well, to a certain extent, has been very impactful in getting to this stage. But what do we actually now need to do to ensure that we get the leap to commercialisations between now and, say, 2030, for example? Would you like to start on that?
Yeah, I do think it's not only the UK, right? I think, just to make that clear, I think the UK, as far as I know, I don't know of any other Future Flight Challenge programs around the globe who have pushed really so far, not only financially, but it takes much more than just giving money to a cause, right? So I think it's like the general kind of, almost like the country was behind it. And I think if we look at, okay, so everybody is excited about Paris. In July, nobody really knows under what circumstances our volocopter going to fly, but everybody knows it never had a commercial business case behind it. Sure. So it's simply a showcase, at least to show that the industry is progressing, which is important. Sure. Then the year after, it will be in Rome, yet there's still no commercial case behind it. So I think it's not only the UK. I think it's almost like a phenomena which has been happening in advanced air mobility, and just because it's very difficult probably to find this, what makes it a profitable operation, because there's so many things that we don't know. Then the problem is there's lack of data, so everybody makes the assumptions, oh yes, somehow it will work itself out. But I think that's why it's so important when we go back to delivering and being practical. So really saying, okay, if we, like we did in Coventry, but maybe on a more permanent basis, to say, okay, if we got non-aero in, we start combining it with F&B, there's intermodal connectivity where you can start making money, so we start charging for one flight per hour. I think really the first step is to really do it. I really think that's the only way.
Right.
Otherwise, we will not be able to move away from this white paper exercise where everything looks really promising because everybody makes up all the numbers, but nobody really starts doing it.
Right.
And I think there will be no way around it, somebody needs to take it and say, okay, we will start, and even if it will be loss making at the beginning, probably, like any type of infrastructure.
Sure.
Will take a long time to then, it's a long game in the end.
Absolutely. Samir, what do you think?
I would also say the just do it, but I think there's an F word missing if I was going to say it. It is sort of frustrating to see all the great technology and the kind of pump priming and the seed funding you get through things like Future Flight Challenge, and then see companies like Skyports put their first, vertiport overseas, even though they are, really trying to launch it in the UK. So I think this cross-governmental piece would be really interesting, because certainly when we engage across the kind of future flight patch, lots of different government departments, and then some localism with councils as well, and sort of being able to do that education piece at that local level, I think is super challenging for a sector and a market that doesn't exist, let alone explaining aviation and aerospace as it traditionally was, and that's relatively easy to understand. So I think a lot more kind of cross-governmental work would be great to see, certainly any future phase of future flight for me.
I'm not sure I can add too much, because they're two very good answers. I mean, certainly the idea of something which is a stage beyond. So we've done an awful lot of R&D, an awful lot of proving. We've, as I said before, built a really integrated community and ecosystem. And in 5 years' time, the public will be paying for this. It'll be fully cash making. And it's that bit in the middle where there's an intervention which is sort of incentivizing, supporting and de-risking some initial operations. So I think we'd certainly see there being, could we get a couple of regions where we put in place the capability, the infrastructure that allows you to do early stage, slightly risky operations that may not be commercial yet. So just edging in there. So for me, that's the biggest issue. Eventually, we want there to be, I'm sure we all do, no government involvement. This just runs nicely. There's been heavy government involvement. What's the thing you do in the middle that's just a hybrid? The other thing that I'm quite keen on, I'll share openly, and this is more probably for drones, UAS, than it is for advanced air mobility, is just public sector procurement. That's something I think some of the countries do quite well, where I'll pick my favourite example. It probably isn't the one we'll do first, but coastal monitoring. I know why that coastal monitoring really entertains me. I think there's 4 or 5 government agencies that do different bits of coastal monitoring. It's really quite expensive. Drones are made for it. Could we construct a contract where for 5-6 months those 5 agencies could work together and we could just do that as a service? And if it doesn't work, you revert back to what you had before, but you're not doing R&D, you're having a go at doing the service. So that kind of public sector procurement and a couple of regional applications, and just get going on the commercial services with government support. Yeah,
it's quite interesting, because a programme of work we did, which finished about a year or so ago, was the Drone Pathfinder programme. And in fact, one of the examples, use cases which we actually demonstrated, was the coastal monitoring, and it was amazing the response we got back. But it was then getting those departments to actually say, yes, we should be having this, and when they have their calls out for offering for new service providers, that the drone side of things is not included. It's always that so you've got all these and it can be quite dangerous sometimes. So it's quite surprising.
Just adding to the kind of public procurement side, again, I don't want to air all of my frustrations. I don't want to beat everybody up, but it's that link between the military aviation R&D development production and on the commercial side, we've never quite got that right in the UK. Although both of those sectors are pioneering in their own right. So, advanced air mobility would be a good example of, when we look to the US, for example, programs like Agility Prime. So Joby over there are working with the Air Force to kind of test the military requirements and use airfields for testing. We've got a whole range of military aerodromes and that sort of infrastructure that's available to us, if we can better link the R&D, I think, between public sector more broadly, but certainly commercial and defence aerospace and aviation.
Sure, absolutely. I just want to move back to a point that Gary mentioned earlier. So it's about public acceptance or public engagement, which I prefer to use that term. It's obviously going to be important, if not paramount, to the success of the introduction of future aviation. So how are we actually addressing those, the concerns, particularly around potential concerns around noise and privacy and safety, and who actually owns the responsibility for shaping public or societal perceptions and fostering that acceptance? Do you want to start on that one, Gary?
So let me have a go. And as you know, Andrew, we've funded an amount of activity through University of Birmingham on social sciences. And I know some people don't get that, and you know why we're doing social science work. I want to explain why I think that's really important. When you go to a mode of public acceptance, you're doing it from I know what the right answer is, and the public just need to get this. So you're in sort of a PR or sales and marketing mode. I know you don't get it, and I'll persuade you. And the reason we've done the work with Professor Fern Elston-Baker from University of Birmingham is they don't have that. They're independent, much as they're part of our team. So they absolutely having conversations with the public to understand where the public really is. And I'll have to keep this a little short because it's very, very involved. But there's a lot of sophistication in that. And in their terminology, we're having that conversation about new tech with the public way, way, way upstream of where anybody's ever done before, to the extent that the social science researchers, there's no body of evidence for how you do this. We're having a conversation almost too early. So there's a lot of activity gone into creating artifacts, and there's lots of games and lots of video material where you're trying to get the public in a space of thinking what this will really feel like, so you can then start to work out what there will be, what kind of objections they will have. Now, if that makes sense, that bit of independence and that really cutting edge social science research is really important, because if not, you're either saying, I think I know what the public's concerns will be and I'll address those, or you ask the public what their concern is, but they've no idea what you're talking about, so they tell you a concern and you address that. And so that's trying to imagine what the concerns will really be. And really quickly, I'll just give an example of this, and we're going to publish lots more on our most recent public dialogue here. But it's quite sophisticated. You know, the public, when you have the conversation, it's quite sophisticated. So noise appears, but I would say effect on wildlife, effect on bird life, effects on wildlife on the ground. That's right up there, which is not where you would go to. The equitability of this, you know, to the degree to which all members of the population would have some access to these new forms of aviation, versus it being a niche thing. And then this has not come up in this round, but has in the past. Who is the decision maker? And this nervousness that says, if this is a tech industry, it's digitally enabled, and it is, if it goes to what they perceive as the big tech companies, they perceive that governments lose control and nobody can regulate, that really, really scares people. So that sophisticated conversation that says, we see local governments, agencies, regulators and central government as actually quite trusted bodies, and we'd like to see them in the middle of it. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavour. I've gone into some content rather than just the what, but you've got to have a sophisticated conversation about this stuff. Don't just poll the public and say drones, yes or no.
Sure. Samir?
I mean, I had an answer, but I think the answer is let these guys do it, because they seem to have all the access to the knowledge, you've done the research, as opposed to sort of trying to take the pulse of the public in a less than sophisticated way. But I think the sort of explaining the societal good is super important here. And I still haven't seen for example, the advanced air mobility sector, for example. Wouldn't it be great if the first use cases were, you know, London's Air Ambulance, for example, that's run off 2 helicopters trying to serve 6 million people and run as a charity, by the way. And you know, ICAO did something on Ambular, again, sort of an interesting similar project. So I think if we find those really interesting use cases, that's what we need to be able to take to the public. And honesty, because a lot of the public aren't that daft. You know, we have to be really genuine and authentic. And this, you know, advanced air mobility will be an expensive game in the first instance. But so was flying.
Yeah.
You know, we forget the ability to get halfway across Europe for 50 quid. The low-cost airline model is only 15 years old. Before that, it was the purview of the rich and famous. So it will take time to get that scale before you see that full societal benefit. So we mustn't pretend it's a kind of Uber elevated model, and from day one, people are going to be able to afford these air taxis.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea, from your perspective on the public, when you did the demonstration in Coventry, I mean, you had weekends where the public were allowed to go in there. So what was your experience
Yeah,
of that
I was just thinking back because we had 15,000 visitors, so it's a huge number for 3 weeks into something which is normally seen as a very niche and inaccessible sector. So for us, it was very encouraging. So mostly because we had school classes, we worked with the university, so there was a big promotion on STEM, but also industry leaders and just general public. Everybody was very enthusiastic, but to be honest, I would have been the same, right? Because you, for the first time ever, everybody could take photos and selfies in front of Supernal's eVTOL. Nobody can do that unless you go to an expensive air show. But why would you do that, right? As a school kid. So I think we made it very accessible, and hence the excitement. And you could see drones flying around and carrying cargo. And then there was a cafe, and it was fun, and there was just amazing buzz. But I think when it comes to public acceptance, I almost think I'm not sure whether I would use the word sophisticated, because in the end, for me, it is almost like getting a planning approval for a mini airport. So we worked on Heathrow, we've done lots of airports around the world, and public consultation is this scary thing for architects and planners, etc., because action groups can be very powerful, as we know. And things might happen or they might not happen. But I think it is first identifying, of course, anything will be safe, otherwise it wouldn't be granted approval to fly. From a sound perspective, Arup have this amazing sound lab, which they used for the third runway, to really show people, the impact of 6 in the morning, during congestion time, etc., and how the perception of noise changes. And then I think it's also, what does it do to my real estate? Am I living in an area where a vertiport will be implemented? Does it lift my real estate up? Will other things happen?
Sure.
Will it become a more affluent area? And I think it's really, rather than keeping it as a high level subject, are you in favor in general or not? I think it would really be to say, okay, we are planning one at Euston and at, Heathrow. This will be the first route. And then you will get community engagement, because people then really understand, okay, will it be a benefit? How much will it cost? Can I take it? If I can't take it, there might be other benefits.
Sure. Great. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to read without having my glasses on, which doesn't really work very well. Sorry. Samir, Future Flight Challenge is, it's undeniably starting to put the UK on the map for advanced air mobility services. So how do we bridge the capability gap between small-scale demonstrations and those fully-fledged commercial operations? What sort of action does industry, government and regulators need to take to address this? I guess it's that, again, it's going to that big step into commercialisation, I guess.
Yeah, I think, we've partly answered the question through some of the answers given around industrialisation and whether we've got that kind of valley of death or a market failure or something like that, which is quite difficult to assess when you've got a market that doesn't exist today, right? This is a brand new mode of transportation, a mode of mobility. But in terms of when we've got one of the world's most powerful financial centres right here in the city, and how do you leverage that to get some more patient capital, which might need to be pump-primed by government to incentivise. But surely we must be smart enough to be able to kind of link those industries, if you like, the huge powerful financial sector and what we've got in aerospace and aviation.
Sure.
And so over and over again, aviation has proved that is a sound long-term investment. And Clive, you can probably roll out the results, the numbers in terms of how much launch investment for the Airbus A320 continues today to pay back government for an aircraft that was, incredibly successful. And I don't see that this is going to be any different. If the investors come in, if they're patient with that capital, there are going to be huge returns.
Okay. Anyone else would like to add to that? Or
perhaps a couple of quite diverse and different points. One is just to your latter point there. We're hosting an event in June somewhere in the City of London, where we're trying to have that conversation with a range of financial providers. And I won't try and describe exactly what it is, but what they'll need to do is hear from government, and we'll do a bit of that role, saying the Future Flight Challenge existed. They will then be able to see the Future Flight Industry Action Plan has been, published and has a minister behind it, so they'll be able to hear that the country believes in this stuff. We'll then hear from a number of companies, and we have a lot of companies who can tell really good news stories, and trying to connect them. My perspective is that, finance is not easy to come by anybody, but across the whole future flight industry, there's lots of different types of industries. Some of them are well financed, some aren't, but there's a huge investment story. So we're going to try and hold an event to do exactly like you say. Second, and a completely different point, and I'm going to throw this back to the audience here, but anybody online as well. So absolutely everyone agrees that the UK is really good at innovation, and we find it hard to do that commercialisation bit. Everybody knows that's absolutely true, including me. I know that's true. Then when I say to people, great, so what should we do? It's really hard to come by that answer. So as we try to construct arguments for the next involvement, intervention beyond future flight, how do you springboard into something else is really important. So anyone in the room, not now, there's no time according to the clock, but do send those ideas in, because we can't just sit here and say the UK is terrible at this without saying, and this is what we should do to stop being terrible.
Yeah. If I can just
please do. No, ignore that.
Okay. I was just thinking, so we have this example of Skypod doing something, and Gary talked about it. I think that came out of a Future Flight Challenge 3 years, or probably, to use Bista's aerodrome, right, as a test site, and money goes in there, etc. But I think just because it's available, I'm really not sure. I don't think actually this is the right way forward, because rather than really looking at the business case, and this goes back to commercializing eVTOL operations, how do we get there? We really need to understand willingness to pay, right? And yes, I'm not saying let's go straight into City of London, this will be a nightmare, but let's choose something where people really want to go, because we had various discussions with the guys from Bista, and they said, well, the aerodrome is underused, so that's a good way of, we get some rent from Skyports or something, whatever the deal they have, and but we have very good connection to Bista Village via the train. We have special bus services, etc. So it didn't really seem that there was this interest in a long-term eVTOL operation. And I think we need to kind of almost identify, take all the money and team up with the right people, which I think hasn't happened, right? Everybody works in their silos, and money goes to this eVTOL, and then everybody has to go through the same problems anyway. So if there could be more camaraderie or something, or true partnerships, then we could identify a site where we think, okay, this is definitely, that will be a popular route based on willingness to pay or whatever mobile data. And then we start thinking, okay, let's start with a small vertiport with infrastructure, put some charging in, and then let's start try and test this route. And I think ultimately you will then, maybe it will be a profitable case, maybe it won't be, but I think we have to identify the right locations rather than just the ones that are available. Because there are 500 underutilized aerodromes, like Jeremy Hartley, that's his favorite thing from the CA to say, yes, we use the 500, but what if nobody wants to go there? Sure. So I think we have to be really practical about things.
No, absolutely. I think in defence of that decision, though. Oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add. I certainly don't disagree with the approach, and part of the fragmentation of the investment, I think, has come from. It's still really hard to work out where the value, the return on investment is. Is it in the vehicle? Which part of the vehicle? Is it in the operators? Is it in the MRO even, which is a segment we don't talk about enough when it comes to AAM and UAM. So I think that's why organisations, including bits of government, end up sort of competing, because I don't think we've worked out where the value really is in this really long and interesting and complex value chain. So I think, there are some things that we'll never compete on in terms of safety. We'll all need the airspace and that digital infrastructure. But all the other areas, to an extent, I think it's great that we are competing at this stage until we work out where the value is, and then I think those collaborations will sort of naturally form. I'd like to ask Vertical, I mean, how many vehicle companies are there in the world? Sort of over 200 at the moment, that kind of segment.
900 odd projects, probably 10 or a dozen that is.
And they're going to consolidate
Yeah.
into something which then turns into a market. So yeah, I certainly agree with the elements of what you're saying and
Okay.
fragmentation. Yeah.
Okay, I have just been reminded that I shouldn't have said we'll ignore the clock because there's a minister going to speak shortly in another room. But before we get to the aviation minister, which would be quite weird, final question, I guess. So, 10 years' time, we look back at this programme. What would you like to see have been achieved, or where we are in 10 years' time, based on what we've achieved in the Future Flight Challenge?
I think I would like to see that, all the effort that has gone into it, that we not only, I don't think the UK has to be the first. I don't think it's about that, but I think it's to put things into place, and maybe we can be the pioneers, and then we start licensing our models, right? So to have global reach. And I think to really say, what did we start out to do? What was our vision at the beginning?
Right.
To be the pioneers, but we have a commercial case, but it might not work for our geography here. It might work really well in America in certain areas. But I think all that has to somehow be commercialized, monetized.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that we have to be the ones who are doing the infrastructure first and the first eVTOL flights. I don't think it's about that.
Great, thank you. Samir?
I sort of just picking up on, I don't think there's any necessity to be first to market with this. In fact, it's probably better if you're a bit later on, learn from some of the mistakes. It's be the best rather than be the first.
Great.
I know that's not an answer in terms of where we're going to be in 10 years, but recognising everyone wants to go and listen to a minister.
Well, I want to listen to Gary Cutts answer
Yeah,
that question,
absolutely.
because as the challenge director, I'd really like to know what he thinks in 10 years' time he'd like to see happen.
Let me be really brief and say something you may not expect me to say. So I hope I'm meeting people in 10 years' time who say, I wish I'd been there when you did that. That was fabulous. That was amazing. That's the biggest change in aviation we've ever seen. Because I think eventually this has to be driven by us being enthusiastic and loving the change that we're enacting. So yeah, I want people to look at this as the best time and the biggest change we've ever done.
Great. I think that's the best answer to finish on. So thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Andrea, Samir, and also to Gary. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.